Welcome to the Big Ten in 10. I'm Vaughn Dalzell alongside Robbie Hummel. We have a lot to discuss today with all the OT games that happened in the Big Ten this week. And Robbie, you were courtside for one of them last night, a thrilling win for Illinois as they beat Nebraska. And we also had some movement earlier in the day between Purdue beating Wisconsin. So I want to ask you, after seeing Illinois up close in person, are they the number 2 team in the Big Ten now?
Boy, that's a good question. You get Shannon back. You have had some guys who have really played well in the absence of Terrence Shannon, and I think that they're playing very confidently. You look at a guy like Marcus Damask, you look at Coleman Hawkins, certainly Quincy Guerrier is a factor in that team, and Ty Rodgers has played phenomenally the last 3 games. They've won 3 straight. They've won 5 of 6. But they haven't been necessarily as sharp, I think, as you would like to see. And maybe some of that has been kind of reacclimating the team to a guy like Terrence Shannon coming back from suspension.
Sure.
Nebraska, they're up 10, 3 to go. That game ends up in overtime. They did not finish the game well. They played really well at Ohio State. The Indiana game, it was kind of a slog. I didn't think they were sharp in that one. So I really like this Illinois team. I think they're talented. I think that they have a chance to kind of regain the form we saw earlier in the year, which we all thought was, man, they could be a Final Four team. But certainly kind of getting back to, I guess, a level where you can see the comfort with all the players is my biggest concern with them. Are they the second best team? I'd still probably lean Wisconsin, I think, but a tough week for the Badgers. And look, there's no shame in losing to Purdue at home. There is a surprise that they had the big lead at Nebraska and then just played terribly in the second half and in overtime. So they're neck and neck. I'm going to still go Wisconsin. The road is a tough place in this league. I don't think Illinois has maybe played the level of basketball that I would need to see to say that they're the number 2 team in this league. It's close, but I'm going to go Wisconsin still as number 2, and Illinois is right there at 2B.
Yeah, and not to say that I disagree completely because I think it's a 2A, 2B situation, but I did go Illinois number 2 in the power rankings. Maybe a little bit recency bias, but I thought even Wisconsin could have lost that game to Minnesota on the road, and they should
Yeah.
have. They didn't. They lost to Penn State, so those 3 of their last, 3 losses in their last 6 games didn't look that good for the Badgers. And I key up that March 2nd game against Illinois. It's a home game for Wisconsin, so they certainly have the advantage to be the number 2 team in the Big Ten, but Purdue, obviously number 1, the clear favorite now. They're asserted their dominance. What are you expecting from them now down the rest of the season? Because they're favorites in every game. They're now the number 2 team in terms to win the NCAA tournament.
Well, I think the biggest thing for them, Vaughn, is that they have a whole week to recharge. This kind of bye comes at a great time for them. That they have been on quite the run. I think they've won 7 or 8 in a row. And you look at just kind of their schedule. It's been a grind from the time they got to Maui. It feels like they have been on full blast. It's a tough schedule, one of the toughest strength of schedules in all of college basketball. The week to kind of recharge the batteries. You get Indiana at home. I feel like they're a team that is maintaining their spot as honestly they're the top team in college basketball or the second. I think them and UConn are the 2 that are the clear-cut favorites going into as we come down the final stretch here and get into the dog days of February. But yeah, Braden Smith has been phenomenal. Their guard play is what stands out. The fact that Zach Edey does not necessarily play great, and they still are able. And look, play great. He has like 17 and 11 or 12. For most guys, that's having a really good game. For him, that's an off night. But the fact that Lance Jones and Braden Smith and some of Purdue's guards have played the way that they've played, it's a different team from last year. I think it's going to be a different story in the NCAA tournament. And to me, Purdue is one of the juggernauts of this college basketball season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of people want to continue to bring up what Purdue has done the last few years in March Madness, but I think this team is wiping away that smell of defeat they've had early on. And I think the guard play is a big reason why. So I totally agree. And I was impressed in the game against Northwestern, Robbie, because not only was it 105-96 and a thrilling game to watch, but Northwestern has been a very interesting team, going to overtime in 3 of their last 4 games, only winning 1 of those games. What's your confidence with them? Because they got Nebraska up next, and Cornhuskers is their team that I put them as my number 5 team. They're riding hot right now and impressive. Who do you have more confidence in?
Well, that's a good question because I really like what Nebraska has done. I think Fred Hoiberg has done a phenomenal job, and certainly he questioned their toughness, the Cornhuskers, that is, after the loss at Maryland. You know, he said that they just weren't tough enough. They turned the basketball over. They got punked on the offensive glass. I love the way that they played last night. They gave themselves a chance. Tominaga was just outstanding.
Phenomenal.
But for Northwestern, I do feel like, and they've been in close games all year long. They've kind of gone either way. It's been one of those deals where lately it's turned in the direction of losing some of those close ones, but they have won a lot of close games as well. I think this is a 2-game kind of stretch where they can get right. They're at home. Their student section has been outstanding. I think that this has been a tough stretch for the Cats. And Minnesota on the road is a different deal this year than what we've seen in years past. So I understand that there could be some concern. You lose to Purdue in a thriller. You lose to Minnesota in another overtime game. I'm sure Chris Collins and all Wildcat fans would have liked to have had that second one up in Minneapolis. But I do think now with Nebraska and Penn State at home, they can kind of right the ship. Their schedule sets up pretty favorably here for them to go on a run. And I still like Nebraska. I think both teams are in a good spot to make the NCAA tournament. Where do you stand on both those teams?
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement. I think those teams are solidifying themselves day by day. And I think there's a couple teams in the Big Ten that are creeping along the lines of bubble teams. I'm not going to say they're in the bubble, but you spoke about Penn State for a second there. They're a team that's getting really hot, worth watching. But Northwestern losing Minnesota was surprising to me. I love the spot against Nebraska and Penn State, the next 2 games for them. But speaking on Minnesota in a nutshell, they had a 4-game losing streak. And they go out and beat Penn State on the road. Then they beat Northwestern at home in OT. What is the thought process on this team now? Because they have Michigan State up next. That game is on Peacock. If Minnesota wins, are they in the NCAA tournament, a bubble team?
Boy, that's a good question. You know, it's a shame that they lost to Missouri back in November
It is.
because that was a game where they were up 19 or 20 and they just kind of imploded with 8 minutes to go. They end up losing that game. I don't know necessarily what their best non-conference win would be. I think it's probably probably Florida Gulf Coast, I think,
Yeah.
which is
They need these Big Ten
253.
wins. They need these
They
Big Ten
need,
wins.
yeah, they're going to have to really do some work here in the Big Ten, but that starts with Michigan State. You know, that's going to be a big game on Peacock Tuesday night. The Spartans need wins, certainly, and I think in years past you'd say, well, we're going to Minnesota. This is one of those games where we can get right, but Ben Johnson has done a phenomenal job. Pharrell Payne off the bench has been really good. Dawson Garcia gives them a legit star. Elijah Hawkins, I believe, still leads the country in assists per game. They've kept that core together for the most part from last season. They've gotten some better guards in there, and that has paid big dividends in Minneapolis. I like this Minnesota team. It's going to be a war Tuesday night, and that certainly is a game to watch because both teams really need it. If Minnesota wants to get into that bubble conversation, this is a game that they have to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben Johnson doing his best Fred Hoiberg impression, getting this team right finally. They had 9 wins last year, already 14 this year. But as you noted, they need some quality wins in Michigan State and Iowa next 2 games. If they beat Michigan State, get Iowa on the road, they start to enter a conversation. Do we watch out for Minnesota? Do they sneak in somehow? But another team that I don't think has a chance to get in, but this might be a must-win situation, Robbie, is
Yeah,
Indiana against Penn State. The Hoosiers are in desperation right now.
they are.
What's your
And I think
thought
Ohio
process on
State is
them?
too. I think
Oh,
both those teams
absolutely.
are in desperation. You know, this is kind of one of those games where you're like, the winner kind of gets off the mat and the loser is like, well, this is probably
It's
over
over.
with. Both teams need it bad. That's the I believe the early game on Tuesday on Peacock. And man, Indiana, they're banged up. They've had a bunch of injuries. Xavier Johnson's status is still up in the air with his lower arm injury, I think is what they're calling it. Malik Renew is banged up. Khalil Ware has missed some time. They just, man, the loss to Penn State was really disheartening. You lose like
Yeah.
that on your home floor to a team that's missing their leading scorer. There were some boo birds out in Bloomington. It's they have to have this one, but Chris Holtman's team needs it equally as bad. You know, both these teams to kind of give some hope to the last month of the season. This is one you've got to get. Really, 2 big games Tuesday night.
Yeah, Indiana 1-4 in their last 5 games. They're actually projected to be underdogs in every single game, the remaining rest of the regular season schedule. So
Yep.
that's very concerning for them. And Ohio State, 1-7 in their last 8. These guys have lost 13 straight road games, but lucky for them, 3 of their next 4 are at home. So I think things could be looking up for Ohio State compared to Indiana, Robbie. It's going to be a very interesting week, though. A Big Ten action, the 2 games on Tuesday on Peacock. So I'm excited. Michigan State versus Minnesota and Indiana versus Ohio State. Best of luck with all your games. You'll be on the sideline at. We'll be watching. That's Robbie Hummel. I'm Vaughn Dalzell, and this was the Big 10 and 10. We'll see you next time.